Welcome back to the Operation Freedom YouTube channel. What we do here is shine the light of truth on the deep state. They hate that. We do it figuratively with our presentations. We do it literally with our sponsor's product, PatriotLegacy.com. PatriotLegacy.com, featured product of theirs, the Patriot Beacon. 6 overall lighting functions. In addition, solar powered, don't need batteries. You can charge your other devices like your phone from it. In addition, you got a compass, you got a window breaking hammer, and you got a seatbelt cutter. Plus, if those deep state dweebs get just a little bit too close to you, blast them with this. They're gone. Go to patrioticlegacy.com, patrioticlegacy.com. Get yourself, your kids, your grandkids, your car. Can carry it with you anytime. patrioticlegacy.com, the Patriot Beacon. I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to Operation Freedom Briefings. The goal of these briefings and my weekly radio show, Operation Freedom, is to provide you information you're not going to get from the bought-off lamestream fake media. The title of today's report is FISA Courts, the IG Report, and the Road Ahead. I'm recording this late Monday night, much later than I usually record my Tuesday morning YouTube presentations. And the reason is because I wanted to take the time and put the effort into the IG report, which was released on Monday, December 9th. 476 pages, I believe it was, of interesting reading, to say the least. By way of foundation, for 31 years now, I have been involved in policy-related issues and review of policy-related issues, mainly on the healthcare front and how it impacts a number of agencies and the like. I have had the opportunity of reading a tremendous amount of legislation in my day, a tremendous number of reports. I'm an old guy. And when I first read Hillary Care back in the early 90s, I really felt it was the worst piece of legislation, the worst thing that I had read coming out of government. Fortunately, at that point, there was still some semblance of sanity in the Washington, D.C. area, and it did not pass. The reason I was against it was because it was about the empowerment of big government, and that it really destroyed the American public's healthcare delivery system. When Obamacare came around, and remember, I was one of the people that identified that Obamacare was actually 2 parts. The first part hidden in the stimulus bill. That's where the rationing boards and the enforcement boards were. And then the second part, which was the healthcare bill. Now, when I was involved in that analysis, at that point, I felt it was one of the worst pieces of legislation, even worse than Hillary Care, if you can believe that. And mainly because it was based on the most unethical and inhumane means of cutting costs, and that was the rationing and denying of care. I felt that it would lead to a less affordable care, less available care, and less quality-oriented care. I was demonized for that. But 10 years later, I believe I've been shown to be 100% accurate on that assessment. I've read many other reports, many other pieces of legislation over the years. I have gone through the Inspector General's report. And of all the documents I have read coming out of government, this is by far the most upsetting, maddening, and discouraging that I've ever read. My sources coming into this told me that Horowitz was going to present tremendous amounts of information, which he did do, and his team did do, that showed that the FISA process, the warrantless, if you will, the survey, the how people are surveilled, if you will, through the court system. It was going to show that the FISA process and the individuals involved in the FISA process were in fact corrupted and corrupt. And I believe my sources were accurate on that. And we're going to go through some of these findings here that I've come up with and that others have come up with. But what my sources also put forward was that the 4 FISA warrants in particular, and remember the scope of this, and I've outlined this. If you haven't seen my video from last week or listened to the radio show I did this past Sunday and a couple other Sundays before that, and where we focused on the IG report, we talked about the scope being so limited. Remember, the Inspector General cannot indict anybody, can recommend people for prosecution, which he's already done. He's already recommended Comey for prosecution and McCabe for prosecution. But the Inspector General of the Department of Justice cannot go outside the Department of Justice, cannot talk to Brennan or Clapper or anybody in the CIA or the military, the Department of Defense. And he cannot indict anybody. He doesn't have a badge. Can't prosecute anybody. He can recommend. I've gone through this report, and it is devastating to the Department of Justice, to the FBI. I actually believe it's devastating for every American. Because when you read through this, you go, my gosh, if they're doing this against somebody running for president of the United States, what can they do to any and all of us? That's the depressing part. And that's the angry part. And Horowitz and his team lay out in excruciating detail the real terrible stuff that occurred in the Department of Justice and in the FBI. And in particular, focused on the FISA process with Carter Page and those 4 FISA applications and warrants that were generated to surveil Carter Page, a low-level individual in the Trump campaign. And Horowitz and his team point out how corrupt the process was and how corrupted the Department of Justice and the FBI and, frankly, the FISA court had become. But here's where my sources didn't have it right. What they said, and this is from going back months, he's going to present all this information and at the end cannot indict anybody, but at the end will say, look, the system is beyond broken and it needs to be fixed. Horowitz did that. But you even heard Joe DeGeneva speaking about this in the past, and Victoria Tensing, that the evidence will be so overwhelming, and the fact that these 4 FISA warrants were found to be based on vapor and fictitious and falsifications, that the people who ultimately signed off on them, Comey the first 3, and McCabe and Rosenstein the last, because they signed them under penalty of perjury, even though they were given bad information, they're on the hook. And when you read this, that's exactly what Horowitz says. But then he doesn't pull the trigger. He doesn't recommend that Comey, because under penalty of perjury, signed the first 3 FISA applications, and McCabe and Rosenstein, who signed the last. He doesn't recommend to the Attorney General, just as he did prior with Comey and McCabe on other related matters, he doesn't recommend that they be prosecuted. And that is the beyond frustrating part. Now, right when this was released at 1 o'clock Eastern this afternoon, very soon after that, because Attorney General Barr and Prosecutor John Durham have obviously had this report for several weeks, they both issued statements, which we're going to read and talk about. And they were statements that are not only appropriate, but need to be acted upon. Now, I first want to give you a little background on the FISA court. The FISA Act was initiated in 1978. It's an 11-judge panel appointed through the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Judas Roberts. And we're going to get into him and the judges in a little while. Rosemary Collier has been the chief FISA judge since May of 2016. She approved, it's my understanding, the first application on the Carter Page FISA warrant. Now, I talked to some folks in D.C. today about what percent of applications that come in front of the FISA court are approved. And the number I got was 98%. 98%. Now remember, when a FISA hearing is held, it's just the government presenting. There is no defense for the person who they're looking at to say, wait a minute, you can't, that's bad information. You can't, there's none of that. And this is where it's going to get to be very frustrating. The 4 FISA warrants were issued in October 2016, the first one, that was signed off under penalty of perjury by Comey and Sally Yates. This is on the Carter Page, FISA application and the renewals. The second was in January 2017, signed off by Comey and Sally Yates. The third was in April of 2017, signed off by Comey and Dana Boente. And the fourth was signed off on June of 2017 by McCabe and Rosenstein. Now, why didn't Comey sign the last one? Because Comey had been fired in May of 2017. The FISA court, it has been renewed until March of 2020, as far as the renewal of their existence. Based on this report, I think the burden of proof is with Judas Roberts and all those FISA court judges about why they should exist. Frankly, I think every one of those 11 judges and Roberts, in a public hearing, under oath, should be put in front of the cameras in a congressional committee and asked about this IG report and the findings. Because when I read the report, what seems to get swept under the rug is, where was Roberts on all of this? Where were the judges on all of this? You know, if I'm a judge and somebody's presenting me some information, says, yeah, okay, well, we're presenting you information, and our source is this Christopher Steele guy. Well, he's a legitimate source, and here's what he's saying. I would say, tell me about the Steele guy. Give me all the evidence you have that he's legit. Give me the evidence on his sources. Give me the evidence on his information he's presenting and the backup you've gotten. That didn't happen. Every one of those judges and Roberts needs to be called in and put under oath to make sure that this goat rodeo of a travesty, of denial of rights, not just of Carter Page. When they did it to Page, they did it to all of us, 320 million Americans. They need to be held accountable. And I know that's something hard to believe for a judge, that they would be held accountable. They need to be held accountable after you read this. It's interesting because a former FISA judge, James Robertson, condemned, quote, what he called mission creep, end quote, wherein the Justice Department lawyers, as well as staff of the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA, have come to rely on FISA orders for approval of surveillance that would be more properly approved through Title III criminal warrants, or, here's what he said, or not approved at all. And that's what you get when you read this report. When you boil it all down, if this went through a regular court where a defendant and their attorneys were present, this never would have happened. It never would have gone through. Because it was based on such bogus information and sources. This past Sunday on my show, I spoke about James Howard Kunstler and what he had stated before the report came out. And it's as appropriate today as it was before the report came out. Here's what he said. The Horowitz report is necessarily limited to the Department of Justice Inspector General's narrow mission scope. The IG can only interview current employees of the agency and its stepchild, the FBI, which means that key players in the gotcha game, such as former FBI Director Comey, former Acting Director McCabe, fired Special Agent Peter Strzok, and notably ex-CI Director John Brennan, were outside of Mr. Horowitz's sphere of operations. His scope was also supposedly limited to the issues surrounding FISA warrant mischief. Though those complex shenanigans may have led the IG to other related dodges, cons, and crimes outright, the IG has no real enforcement powers. He can only refer or recommend further action. And that's where he failed. Oh yeah, you got to clean up the FBI, you got to clean up the Department of Justice, you got to clean up the FISA courts. Yeah, okay, superficial. Further action was the people who signed those FISA applications under penalty of perjury, signed documents that were falsified, that had fabricated false evidence. Comey, Yates, McCabe, Rosenstein. Look, their names were on it. And they were attesting to the information in that was legit. Well, it wasn't legit. And they should have be held accountable. And that's the most disappointing aspect of what the Inspector General didn't do today. He didn't pull the trigger. He loaded the chambers with all the bullets. Did. Took the safety off. Put his finger on it. Started to squeeze it. Couldn't pull it. The IG has no real law enforcement powers. He can only refer or recommend further action. Nevertheless, a great deal of anxiety oppresses the Democratic Party now as it waits whether Mr. Horowitz has to say about these matters. The party's propaganda arm, the New York Times, the Washington Post, cable news networks worked up a frenzy of distractions and ruses this past week. For instance, the bombshell that international Madam Mystery Joseph Mifsud was not a hireling of the FBI. Of course he wasn't. Nobody ever claimed he was. He's part of the CIA, right? Again, a guy Horowitz could not interview. Rather, he is suspected as being an agent of the Italian intel service with links to British intel, both used by the CIA as beards for its nefarious activities around its own election meddling of 2016. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's Democratic caucus has been busy with impeachment proceedings, which are insidiously scheduled to continue this week as a smokescreen to conceal the Horowitz findings. But the odor of desperation is thick and rank. Of course, now this is key, behind the Horowitz report loom the specters of Barr and Durham. Whatever they've been up to has been hermetically sealed in a globe of silence, even more oppressive and nightmarish for the Dems than the IG's inquiry. Barr and Durham are able to make things stick, most crucially, genuine criminal culpability for the entire Russiagate fiasco and all its offshoots, including the most recent whistleblower, gossip blower caper. A patently treasonous scheme. Who knows if and when indictments start raining down, but there's a chance that it will be a very hard rain indeed. Now, I want to take you through a couple comments some folks have made throughout the day today. First was Devin Nunes. They had a review of what was in the IG report, and it was before it, just minutes before it was made public. And here's what he said. Devin Nunes, looks like the Department of Justice Internal Inspector General report is clear that Republican FISA abuse memo from February 2018 was accurate and actually understated the FISA abuse and dirty cops engaged in. Time for FISA court to take action. Sidney Powell. The IG report excoriates the FBI abuse of the FISA process. Now, lamestream media weighed in right away. They already had their talking points. Here's what they said. The Inspector General's report exonerates the FBI investigating the Trump campaign. Well, wait a minute. No, it did not. You see, they're trying to make you believe, the bought-off lamestream fake media, that the FBI, that it can only investigate people after it reaches a certain criteria. No. See, the FBI has sweeping powers to investigate anyone and everyone. Period. It didn't exonerate the FBI. Anyone who's telling you that did not read one page of this report. Devin Nunes again. American people will finally learn the truth that the Steele dossier was in fact used in the Obama administration intelligence community assessment and has become the Obama dossier. That's right. This whole goat rodeo about the Russian hoax was based upon a fraudulent document, the Steele dossier. And remember, Brennan, former director of the CIA, had told you, and so had James Clapper, former director of national intelligence, that the Steele dossier was not used for the intelligence community assessment that was used to help launch this Russian hoax narrative and goat rodeo and hoax. Former director of national intelligence James Clapper in 2018 said the following, quote, "I would highlight a very important point. The Steele dossier was not used in the intelligence community assessment," end quote. Oh no, that's not what the report says. The report says it was used. Brennan and Clapper lied to you. Again. Congressman Mark Meadows, I just got out of a nearly 2-hour briefing on the Inspector General report. It is deeply disturbing. Yeah, it is. Some former FBI and Department of Justice officials are about to have some serious explaining to do. Well, should have been more than explaining as far as I'm concerned after you read this. Sarah Carter weighed in. The Inspector General report is going to reveal the FBI FISA abuse. Exculpatory evidence was withheld. Wood's procedure, that's the documentation that the information being presented by the FBI, in this case to the FISA court, was documented, was checked, verified. Wood's procedure not followed. Department of Justice Inspector General Michael Horowitz's reports will reveal that significant evidence was withheld from the court in the FBI's Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act application, true, to gather communications on a short-term volunteer for President Donald Trump's campaign, Carter Page, according to sources familiar with the report. The sources noted that Horowitz's report will reveal that the FBI misled the court, true when you read the report, when they applied for the applications, and its findings contradict a past report submitted by now Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, that there was no abuse by the FBI in regard to FISA. True. Further, the revelations may lead Horowitz to spin off, which he recommended, on a new investigation into whether or not the FBI is following its Wood procedure as required. The procedures stipulate that every fact must be vetted before a warrant is submitted to the secret court to spy on an American. They didn't do that at all. It was gross negligence. Actually, I believe criminality. Quote, there were omissions of evidence, said one source. There are significant problems discovered by Horowitz in his investigation. If Attorney General Barr wants, he can actually withdraw the FISA as a symbolic motion if he does not believe it is valid. This from Kim Strassel from the Wall Street Journal. She's fantastic. Huge. Executive Summary Inspector General Report, Crossfire Hurricane. That was the team that was assembled to do this investigation into the Trump campaign. Failed to inform the Department of Justice of significant information, much of which was inconsistent with or undercut the FISA application assertions. And in fact, when you read through the report, there are two names that come up all the time that withheld information from the FISA court, that manipulated the situation. A guy by the name of Bill Prestep and Peter Strzok. Those two names keep coming up throughout the report. From Pete Williams, no less, of NBC. FBI failed to assess its reliance on Christopher Steele even as they received information contradicting the dossier, did not press him about his sources, relied heavily on dossier for FISA applications. NBC couldn't even hide it. From Mark Meadows, Congressman Mark Meadows, IG report officially released. It reveals the FBI fell far short in vetting accuracy of FISA applications, knowingly withheld exculpatory information, used defensive briefings to secretly assess the Trump campaign, used known illegitimate sources. Department of Justice Inspector General finds that the FBI made 17 significant inaccuracies and omissions in the FISA application to spy on the Trump campaign. The FBI's deceptive manipulations made the evidence appear stronger than was actually the case. Sean Davis from The Federalist. According to the Inspector General, the anti-Trump crossfire hurricane wanted a FISA on Carter Page in August 2016. Get this. They were told there was insufficient evidence to warrant it. But on September 19th, the day the FBI received the bogus Steele dossier, they relaunched the FISA operation on Page. So all those folks that told you it was conspiracy theory, that this fraudulent document, the Steele dossier, was used to get the FISA warrant, have been shown to be lying to you. It was the Steele dossier that was misrepresented to the FISA court. And why the FISA court judges weren't asking a lot of hard questions fast, that makes them, in my mind, culpable on the criminality that occurred with this illegal surveillance.